Good evening. I'd invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew 18, and we're going to be there in just a moment. I just want to say that it's been a pleasure to be with all of you, and thank you again for making provisions for my family to be able to come with, and for our children to be able to be part of all the VBS classes that have been happening. It's been good to reconnect with some of you that we knew when we worshiped at Brentwood. And just very thankful to God that He's blessed us with this family where you can get to know people in a deep way very quickly. I don't know of any other worldview or religion that gives us what we have, and that's a lot of the kind of thing we talked about on Sunday. And I did not know that your guys' theme this year is reaching the lost. Is that what you guys said it is this year? Seeking the lost. Okay. Well, this will go very well then with the things that you guys have been talking about. We'll get into Matthew 18 in just a moment, but I want to start out with a verse that'll be on the PowerPoint, and that is Acts 2:47, where the Bible says, "The Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." So, in the church in Jerusalem, in Acts chapter 2, initially there are 3,000 people baptized when the Spirit comes. By the way, does anybody know how many people were killed in Exodus 32 when the law had been given and there was people worshiping the golden calf? Anybody know how many people the Levites killed? 3,000. So when the law comes, 3,000 are killed. When the Spirit comes in Acts 2, 3,000 are given life. And towards the end of this chapter, I think this is the last verse of this chapter, the Lord was adding to their number how often? Day by day. So here's a question. How often was the Jerusalem church engaged in evangelism? Every day. Was this something where it was like one time a year we have this really big evangelistic push? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having a special emphasis for a period of time during a year. But what do you think the church at Jerusalem, they viewed evangelism as something that we only do once a year? Or this was actually part of their culture, that they were interested in helping people know about the Lord, they wanted to reach other people with the gospel? Like I said last night, one of the contentions that I think people in a church can have, and I think rightly so, is that sermons and Bible classes on evangelism oftentimes are not practical. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is something that literally can and should involve every single member of a local church when it comes to the work of evangelism. So if this church was being used by the Lord for people to be added day by day, think about this question. If we do likewise, what will be required on a regular basis of a local church is that the local church knows how to receive new converts, how to get them integrated, how to help them feel part of something bigger than themselves. This is something that even if you had nothing to do with the process of having that person become a Christian, you now have a responsibility, or at least an opportunity, to be involved in the reception of that person. And so what I want to do in this class is, number one, I want to look at what Jesus taught about receiving infants. And then I want to look at some biblical case studies of people that were converted, two in the Old Testament, one in the New Testament, Rahab, Naaman, and Simon, and look at what could have been difficult for these people as they were seeking to be integrated amongst the people of God. And then finally, I want to wrap up with some discussion sort of questions where we're going to talk about and try to be thinking about this as we go through this. What was helpful to you when you became a Christian? What were things that people did for you after you became a Christian that you would like to see become even more part of the culture of this church? Or maybe you feel like you need to rekindle that and do that more and more for other people. That's where we're going to go with all of this. So in Matthew chapter 18, we're going to begin there. Let's point out that in the Gospel of Matthew, this Gospel emphasizes Jesus' sermons more than any of the other Gospels. There are 5 sermons of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, and all of them end with something like, when Jesus had finished these sayings. Who was Matthew writing to? Jewish audience. And Jesus has 5 sections of teaching. Does that sound like anybody else in the Bible that Jews would really revere? Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And so Jesus is being pictured as the perfect Jew, the perfect Israelite. Matthew is very careful to point out that there are 5 sections of teaching that he gives. And so the first one, anybody know what the first one is? Sermon on the Mount. And that's about kingdom ethics. The second one is Matthew chapter 10, where Jesus deals with evangelism and going out and preaching and teaching. Chapter 13 deals with the parables. And what we're looking at here in chapter 18 is where he deals with relationships amongst brethren in the kingdom of God. And so let's look at this passage here in Matthew 18, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 6. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And calling to him a child, he put him in the midst of them, and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little ones who would believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." Skip down also to verse 10. "See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven." Just start out here, first of all, in this text here, you've got this discussion with the apostles where they're wondering which one of them is the greatest. I think when you look at the parallel accounts and other times where the apostles have discussions like this, they're trying to figure out which one of them is the greatest. By the way, which of those 3 apostles do you think would have an edge on everybody else? Who's Jesus' inner circle, of the 3 inner circle? Peter, James, and John. And so maybe that, we're better than you because we got to see this Mount of Transfiguration. We can't really tell you all the things that happened up there. They're having this kind of discussion. And what does Jesus do in verse 2? He takes a child and puts it into the midst of them. Do you imagine this child that's drooling and kind of maybe burping and making funny sounds? And what does Jesus say about this child? Or what is this an illustration of? Who's great in the kingdom? You got to become like a child, humbled like a child. But what else do you have to do with children in verse 5? You have to receive children. And so if you want to be great, remember that time when you grew up and you no longer had the kind of humility that you were supposed to have? In order to be part of this kingdom, it's like you got to convert back to the way that you used to be as children. And it's not just that, and the emphasis that I want to drive home here is verses 5 and 6 about receiving children. Why would receiving children be a sign of humility or a sign of greatness in Jesus' kingdom? Yeah. Yeah, and so let's say that I sell knives. I'm a Cutco door-to-door salesman or something. Do you think if I start networking with 10-year-olds that's going to be good for my business? What if I'm a real estate agent and I start hanging out with 10-year-olds and I'm giving them lollipops? And do you think they're going to help me get any house sales? Children cannot do anything for you. And if the only kind of people you ever try to seek relationships with are people that you can use as stepping stones to something for yourself personally, you are a user of people and not a lover of people. And so Jesus talks about having to receive children, which means that you have genuine care for other people that can't serve you back. But he starts to apply this in verse 6, I think it is. In verse 6, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin. I think there he starts using this as an illustration about how we interact with new converts. Little ones who believe. There's other times in the Bible, and these aren't always flattering examples, but young Christians can be described as infants or babes. All right, So, in verse 10, don't despise them. What does it mean to despise somebody? Yeah, look down on them, to think little of them, they're insignificant, they don't matter. So think about this question. Why might a local church despise a new convert? And despise doesn't mean I proactively hate you. It means I don't think much of you and I'm not going to give you much attention. Sort of the way that a prideful person would look at a child. Why would a local church despise a new convert? What are some reasons? They're not good enough? Yeah, what else? They don't know as much as I do. Am I going to learn anything about the Bible from them? What else? They don't know much, so that means that they might take a lot of work, and I don't know that I want to invest in that. What else? They haven't changed all their habits yet. And so they're very different from the way that I live, and that's just, I don't understand that, and that's weird. There's like a lot of spiritual diapers that have got to be changed there, and that's dirty work, and I don't want to be involved in that. Yeah? Yeah, maybe their enthusiasm, maybe one of the ways that you could despise a new convert is, well, they're just really enthusiastic right now, and I feel guilty that I'm not as enthusiastic as they are, but that's going to die down after a while, and so they're kind of making me feel insecure, so I'll just kind of shove them off to the side. What else? Any other reasons? Yeah. Yeah, are these people trustworthy? They really got to prove themselves a lot before we would ever help them or invest in them. Good. What else?
I think when you despise someone, at least for me, when I hear the word despise, it's a very personal type of thing. So if you have a deep despise for someone, there's something there that's hitting you deep personal.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something there that they have that you don't. Or maybe you've got something that you've been trying to grasp at. Really, really jealously hating on them, despising them, because there's something there that you just have not been able to reach.
You guys this is good. Have you guys ever seen this happen where somebody's converted and they are on fire for the Lord and they're really busy evangelizing and they're sort of doing more than everybody that's been at that church for 500 years? And people, and so in that case, who's doing the work of the kingdom? It could be the new convert, even more so than the people that have been there for 500 years. And so that could cause people to be jealous. Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to say, deep-seated emotion, jealousy. They're new, and you are not as excited as they.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Do you think, by the way, a new convert is going to help me get to know important brethren? Like those big-name preachers. Are they going to, help me connect with some of those people? Maybe they'll be able to get me to speak at the FC lectures, things like, are any of these new converts going to help me with anything like that? No, they're not. And so how a church receives a new convert says a lot on how humble the church actually is. Sometimes people come with moral backgrounds that we're not used to. There was a guy at the church in California that used to be a bodybuilder, and he had tattoos all over his arm. And tattoos was an Old Testament thing. There's no New Testament prohibition against tattoos. I think Christians got to be careful to make sure that they know that in the New Covenant, it's not a sin. But this guy did have a tattoo on his arm of a scantily clad woman. And he came up to me, he's like, hey, so what should I do about that? I said, that one, I think you should probably remove that one, but in the meantime, wear long sleeve shirts whenever you're coming to church, and probably just all the time, wear a long sleeve shirt until you can get rid of that one. But there can be people that come in certain circumstances that we go, I don't get that. Why would somebody have done that? So I'm not going to invest in this person because they're so different from the people that I'm already friends with. We can also despise people because we're already booked up with friends. And we don't have emotional bandwidth to learn to include somebody else in that. Can you guys think of any other reasons we might despise a little one? Yeah, we don't have the time for it. What's the scary thing in verse 10? See to it that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that in heaven their angels always see the face of my Father who is in heaven. What in the world does that mean? According to that verse, does it say that these new converts have an angel in heaven? It does seem to say that. I don't know what all of this means, but do you want to upset somebody's angel before God? I don't know that I want to do that, and I don't know what all the implications or ramifications of that would be, but that's kind of this warning that's thrown out there. And so what I want to do is look at some of these biblical case studies, and I want to start with Rahab. And just think about some questions we could ask. The text for Rahab is going to be up on the PowerPoint. The next ones we'll have to go to. But anything else you guys want to say about Matthew 18 before we move on from there? Okay, let's look at some biblical case studies. So first of all, Rahab. Joshua 6:25 says, "But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho." All right, so in Joshua chapter 2, there are 2 spies sent out to Jericho, and they don't seem like very good spies because they get found out like immediately in that chapter. And she decides to hide these 2 spies, and they make this deal that as long as she helps them escape, that if she puts the scarlet cord out the window, that they'll know to not destroy the people in there. So she has her family saved alive and herself as well. And so let's ask this question first. What does Rahab's inclusion in Israel teach us about God's grace and the community's role in embracing outsiders? It doesn't matter what their past has been. What else? It doesn't matter who you are. Yes, good. What else? Yeah. Yeah, he sees value in anybody. Anybody's worth saving. Good. What else? So if God is that way, what should God's people reflect? The same attitude. So think about this question. Why might Israel despise Rahab? She's not a Jew. She was a prostitute. Yeah, she's a woman, and then that's, what somehow, what ends up happening with Rahab? Whose bloodline does she become part of? Christ's bloodline. So those would be difficulties, I think, for the Israelites. Does this ever happen in a local church where somebody comes from a very broken and checkered background, and it's very obvious that they have? Do those people feel embraced and feel welcomed? Do we believe that the gospel can transform anybody no matter what they've done? We have to believe that. You guys have heard the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, how Roy Radcliffe was a preacher at a Church of Christ in Wisconsin, and he murdered and ate 17 people, at least the body parts of the body of 17 people. And Roy Radcliffe is preaching and teaching at this church in Wisconsin, and he starts having Bible studies with Jeffrey Dahmer in prison. And Jeffrey Dahmer is baptized for the remission of sins. Does anybody know what some of the congregants of Roy Radcliffe's church said in the news about that? If Jeffrey Dahmer's in heaven, I don't want to be there. And if my preacher has been studying with Jeffrey Dahmer, I'm not going to go to that church anymore. Is that the Spirit of Christ? Not even close. Now, think about this question. What may have been difficult for Rahab as she adjusted to her new Israelite community? Yeah, she could be very embarrassed because the sexual ethics of the nation of Israel is radically different than what she's used to, and it would be a shameful thing for them to know what she's done. What else? She clearly needs to get a new job. Very good. So there's a lot of rearranging that she needs to do in her life in order to be right with God. That's a very difficult thing for her to try to figure out. What else? Yeah, she doesn't know a thing about... Okay, this is a really important thing. Have you ever hung out with a bunch of Christians and you go, oh yeah, Homer Haley this and John Weaver that and Florida College this, and you're name-dropping all of these people, and the new convert sitting there the whole time going, MDR that, MDR this. If we just use a bunch of insider language, with people that don't know anything about this, and we never have sidebars where we explain these things to somebody, how do you think they're going to feel? Lost, immediate, sort of, even though they're in the group of people, they're excluded. Nobody's pulling them aside and saying, hey, this is what we're talking about when we talk about this or that or these other things. And so she's learning a whole new set of laws and a whole new kind of vocabulary. And if nobody sat down to explain some of these things to her, it would have been very confusing. So that would have been, you can imagine, a difficulty for her as she was assimilating into the people of God. Any other difficulties you guys can imagine for her? Yeah, she's got to change the way that she's been worshiping as well. She was worshiping whatever the Canaanite god was of this area. So she's got to learn who Yahweh is, why he's worthy of being worshipped. She knows about the Red Sea crossing that had happened 40 years ago. But other than that, she doesn't know much about him. So there's a lot to learn religiously as well. Anything else? How often do we think about a new convert and the kinds of difficulties for adjusting that they're personally going to have to go through? Getting into their shoes and trying to think about that is one of the things that I think would have helped somebody like her and would help any converts today as well. Anything else you guys want to say about Rahab? All right, let's go to Naaman. Look at 2 Kings chapter 5, and you'll have to open up your Bibles to this one because it's not going to be on the PowerPoint. In 2 Kings chapter 5, you've got the conversion of Naaman. He had the leprosy, and I want to look at what happens after he dips in the Jordan River 7 times, which in the Greek Septuagint, it uses the word baptism there, which is interesting. And so look at 2 Kings chapter 5. And I'm going to go ahead and give you the first question that I want to discuss after we read this text. And the question is this: why is Naaman concerned or worried? Okay, so we're about to read like the first things that this new convert says after he's dipped in the Jordan. So look at this in 2 Kings 5, starting in verse 15. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him. And he said, Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, As the Lord lives before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Then Naaman said, If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offerings or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. But in this matter may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter. And he said to him, Go in peace. What is Naaman worried about here? What was over here? Being seen as a hypocrite. What was over here? Yeah, so he has this, the guy that's a superior to him, his superior wants to go to the house of Rimmon, and it's like he kind of has to assist this guy to sort of bow down before this god. And he's worried that, is that okay if I'm helping him do that? I'm just kind of curious about that. And what is the prophet's response? What's Elisha's response to him? Go in peace. Is that the advice that we would have given him? Would we have said, well, you better just stop doing that because it looks like you're doing something evil. And we have to avoid all appearances of evil, right? Well, think about this question. What challenges might new converts face when their old lives are deeply embedded in godly environments? What was that? Yeah, there's going to be... Do you think people that are converted from the world are just coming from the great backgrounds that all of us have just, probably experienced? No. There's going to be certain things that they have to break free of that may take a moment. There's certain things that might be outside of our cultural expectations that Elisha at least says here, don't worry about that. What examples could you think of this?
drinking alcohol beverages. I can remember a new convert that when the preacher went to visit him, he opened the door and saw beer in the refrigerator, and he just lost it. Here's a guy that's been raised in Catholic religion and has been drinking all his life.
Yeah, flying off the handle about something that we need to probably have a conversation about, and I'm not going to browbeat you into submission in this moment. When I was newly converted, I had a job where I had to work every Sunday morning. And so for the first couple months of me being a Christian, I could only get to worship on Sunday nights. There was nobody at the church that had said, Erik, you've decided to forsake your idols and serve the living God, and what I think that must mean for you right now, if you're genuinely going to be converted, is you have to come to church Sunday morning and Sunday night all the time immediately. And I know you were baptized just a couple days ago, but you weren't here this Sunday morning, so I don't think you were actually converted. Well, no. Do you think it would take time for somebody to figure out, okay, I probably got to get that figured out? What about even, well, can you guys think of other examples that would fit with this? Yeah, maybe they're being converted and they go to they're part of a family that has a lot of peer pressure against Christianity, and they're going to have a lot of difficulties with all of that, and we have to make sure that we're patient and understanding, but also challenging when it needs to be challenged. Anything else on this one? Yeah, they're not fully aware of it, so how are we going to help them think through? This is not an ideal situation, so how do we help them with that? Good. Think about this question. How might this help us embrace new converts? Well, yes. We have to remember, too, how long did it take us to get to the point that we're at? It's taken us a while. And sometimes it can feel like time has passed so quickly that I don't even remember all the work that was involved in that and all the conversations. And so why aren't you exactly like us right now? None of this is to justify sin, by the way, but it is to understand that there are going to be people that are converted in less than ideal circumstances. And there needs to be patience, there needs to be understanding, and if a local church doesn't have that kind of attitude, then you might have a lot of people be baptized, but they're not going to stick around because of the attitude of the church. Anything else you guys want to say about this one? Two hands, you and then you. Yeah, good. Yep.
I think this leads to one of the most destructive things with people sitting in church pews for years, waiting to be good enough to be converted.
Say that last part again.
This leads to treating new converts like this when others see it, then it leads them to sit in church pews for years without being converted, waiting to be good enough to be converted and be a Christian. They want to be fully mature.
Right. Yeah, good. If there's new converts coming in and people in the pew see the way that these people are being embraced and encouraged and all of that, how much more could that encourage everybody who's maybe not been baptized yet but come, or something like that, to say, you know what, this is going to be a community that's going to help me. This is not about being perfect before I'm baptized. Very good. Anything else on any of that? Yeah. Yes, good. And one we could illustrate some of just what God's looking for. Before God, all of us start at 0 and we need him to forgive us. But there's another sense in which all of us have different levels of emotional maturity, moral maturity, and some of it is, even if you grew up in a non-Christian family that at least had good work ethic and stuff, you can come to the Lord with more moral and ethical maturity than somebody who even had a Christian background that had a hypocritical family. So if we illustrate it this way, let's say that, to use a football analogy, you start with the ball at the 5-yard line and you got to go 95 yards for a touchdown. Somebody, maybe in the next possession, they start at the 20-yard line and they have less yardage to go. There's different Christians that start at different yardage lines when it comes to their emotional maturity, their ethical maturity, things like that. What is God looking for? Growth. And so maybe you started at the 5-yard line and 5 years have passed and you're at the 50. And you've been growing. That's what God is looking for. Some people are born into better situations than other people, but the measurement God uses is growth. And one of the ways that we facilitate that is by embracing new converts. All right, we're not going to take the time to look at all of this with Simon the magician, but you guys remember the story in Acts chapter 8 where everybody listened to Simon the sorcerer. You know, no, I'm not going to get into all that, but I will say that Peter, he challenges him, and he says that you're in the gall of bitterness and in the bond of iniquity. There are times that you have to challenge new converts as well, and balancing that with receiving them warmly, but also, hey, you can't keep living this way, or this can't resurface in your heart, and you got to check that. We have to do all of that in good and helpful ways. But I want to spend the rest of the time with these questions. I want to talk about some things that helped me before I was converted and then right after. And then I want to open it up for all of us to share things that might have been helpful to you after you were converted. Just a couple things that stick out to me. I was not judged according to the flesh. Remember that passage in 2 Corinthians 5 where it talks about all who are in Christ Jesus are a new creation? What's the evidence in that passage that we are new creation? In the context, it's that we don't judge other people according to the flesh. Let me tell you this. The girl that taught me the gospel, I was in college, and we had a speech class together, and I used to go to death metal concerts all the time, every Friday night. It was always like Swedish and Nordic bands that are like death metal bands that nobody's ever heard of, and I was really cool because I was into, Opeth and Scar Symmetry and all these people. And so when this girl met me, I used to wear giant leather jackets, and I had sideburns that were down to my cheekbones, and I had headphones around my neck all the time. Don't I clean up really well? And when she told me after I was converted, she said, I can't believe all of this has happened, because when I first met you, I thought you were going to kill me. I personally appreciate that people, and when I would first come to church, I didn't know anything about collared. I grew up in a pretty poor family, and even at my grandpa's funeral, my dad didn't wear a suit. I didn't grow up in a family that cared at all about dressing up ever. And suddenly I'm coming to church in a t-shirt and jeans that have battery acid holes all over it because of the job that I worked at. And I don't know if I fit in with these people. And nobody looked at me and said, what are you doing wearing those kind of clothes here? You were just converted. You're a saint now. You better change all this. No, people didn't judge me according to the flesh, and that was a very valuable thing. Here's another thing. People invited me to spend time with them. I think about Luke chapter 5 when Matthew the tax collector is converted, and the first thing he does is he throws a party with all of his tax collector friends, and who does he include? Jesus comes. And all of these people are being converted, and they're all interested in what Jesus has to say, and of course the Pharisees are wondering why Jesus would spend time with such disgusting people, and he has to teach them about some of that. I think one of the most undervalued and underutilized ways we can be involved in evangelism is in hospitality. When we have some good brethren into our home, do we have non-Christian neighbors and friends we could also include into those meetings, into those times together, where non-Christians can see how is it that godly people spend time with each other? And I really think that's something that more Christians can do better with. I had never seen how a Christian father leads a prayer with his family. I had never seen how a Christian father would discipline his kids around the table if they were goofing off. I'd never seen anything like that, and being invited to be part of people's lives and having good conversations was something that was very, very encouraging and helpful to me. Get to after becoming a Christian. The church was very welcoming. When I was converted, and then I went to the assembly that Sunday night, I wasn't even planning on coming to church on a regular basis. I didn't even know that that was anything that I had to do, or I should do, or I should even want to do. I was just going to drop in and say, hey, yep, I was baptized, right over there. You guys seem great. Thank you. Bye. And that was my attitude going to that church that night. But I left going, there were some people that really seemed really nice. And there was that one family that asked me to get lunch with them, and I thought that was really weird. I don't really want to do that. But there was other people that are just really nice. And I've never experienced people that were that seemingly genuinely loving. And so I think that was a really helpful thing. Members were hospitable. I've sort of already talked about that. People took time to answer my questions. And I had some of the most basic questions you could imagine. But after services, I was pulling anybody aside that I heard in Bible class that would raise their hand and make a comment, and that person seems to know something about the Bible, and I don't know anything. So I would just go up to people and say, my name's Eric, I'm a new convert. Can you tell me blah, 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 blah? Because my mom is kind of challenging me about this. I don't know how to answer this. And I would ask and people would take the time to answer all these questions that I had. Very, very helpful. Let me tell you just a couple things at least one thing, that was not helpful after being converted. And the church that I was converted at was, by and large, extraordinarily helpful. But there's one occasion that sticks out in my mind as something that was not helpful. Do you think growing up not ever singing a cappella, you think I just know all the hymns really well and I know how to hit all the notes? No. It's not my spiritual gift. I'll never be a good song leader. That's just not, I didn't have years and years doing that. There was one time when I was hanging around some of the people and they said, you know what I really hate? And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I want to know what Christians hate. So what do you hate? And they said, we hate it when there's somebody that sits behind us and they don't know how to hit the notes. Who were they talking about without realizing it? This guy that was formerly going to kill people. And so I knew whenever I sat behind those people, I wouldn't sing. Because I didn't want to be a stumbling block to them or something. And I'm still not good at that, and I've learned to try to sing a little bit louder anyways. And if you don't like it, I'm trying to do the best I can, and I'm doing this for God, things like that. But we have to be careful about the kind of statements we make around non-Christians, and in all of us anyways. All right, so those are some things that I wanted to share. I want to break this open into the broader question then. What was helpful to you either before or after your conversion? Just by show of hands, how many of you were not raised in Christian homes? Okay. Raise your hand if you were raised in Christian homes then. Wow. Okay, the vast majority. There's very few people that will speak up maybe for this, or if you were raised in a Christian home, you could still answer this after you were converted. What are some of the notable things people did? So what do you guys want to say about this question?
I asked 1,000 questions. Everybody was very patient, and the teachers were very patient for me to ask because I need to know or have answers, for my benefit and also for my family's benefit.
Good. What else? Yeah.
All after becoming a Christian, other than being thrown into a little small country church and leading singing just because you have the ability, you can sing, you can get up front, be a man and do it, and leading prayer, and doing all the different acts of worship. I don't remember anybody ever really encouraging me or doing anything to. I just grew the faith later on,
Yeah, okay.
but not through the congregation I was in.
I got you. Okay. What else? And maybe part of the way we could ask this is what have you seen be helpful to other people as well? Yeah.
Consistent accountability.
Okay, good. Consistent accountability. How are you doing? How are you doing spiritually? What's the latest in your life? Can we talk to you? Not in a cult-like kind of controlling way, but just in a genuinely loving way. Is there anything that we can do for you? How are you doing? Things like that. Good. What else?
And they ask you to do something in the worship service.
Yeah. Oh,
Ladies make you feel like a rock star.
yeah. Every preacher has heard from Grandma that that's the best sermon I ever heard. Thanks. I needed that. Good. What else? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who grew up in a Christian home, I'm thinking about some people I grew up with at my home congregation back in Mississippi who are a few years younger than me, and a lot of them have, fallen away. And so I'm kind of thinking differences that I think my parents did with me as opposed to them is, after you make that decision, really focus on helping make sure, well, first of all, before I was baptized, my parents really making sure that I understood what I was doing. I wasn't just doing it because it was expected. And then even after that, making sure that, my faith was mine. And I continued to grow in that instead of just kind of going through the motions because it's expected. And so there's a lot of different aspects that go into that about, having those conversations just about the Bible, about different texts, talking about, in my house, I guess we're kind of nerds, and they read debate books and talked about, the arguments that were put forth to defend, the truth and things like that. But just having those conversations as part of your normal everyday life that kind of helps solidify that I'm not just, doing this because my parents did it, because I've seen it firsthand, that fades away and people fall away. But if that's part of your daily, conversation with your parents and people that you're around after your conversion, if you did grow up in a Christian home, then things tend to stick.
Yeah, good. Appreciate those thoughts. There's one other thing that I forgot. I'll get to more hands. Shortly after I was converted, one of the preachers I was studying with on a regular basis was, I think one of the challenges that new converts need to, one of the things that they need to have a conversation about shortly after conversion is, what are you talented in and what are you going to do for the Lord now? Looking at Romans 12 and the list of different gifts that are there, where do you feel like you fit in? What do you think that you could start figuring out how to do? You want to teach? Are you generous? What do you think you could do that would help this body? And it's not just the tenor of, we're here to help you, but also you're part of this body now, and being a body member in the Bible is not like Costco or Sam's Club where you pay something every year and then you get benefits. Being a member in the Bible is a body member, like a functioning part of a body. And so if you're part of this body now, what part do you want to play? Those conversations, I think, need to happen pretty soon. You had your hand up?
I wasn't raised in the church, and so I was a young adult. And so for me, it was, they genuinely cared about me. And so they would invite me into their home. That was a big deal.
Yes.
I think we've gotten away from that, and I think it's damaging, personally. But I was always in somebody's home. My husband was away. He was in the Army, so he was away, and I had a little baby, and they were just there for me to take me in, and that was just a great thing for me. And it wasn't, they didn't want to just take the Bible and beat me over the head.
Yeah.
And make me like them. They genuinely cared about who I was, and it was patient.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for sharing that. Good. Any other thoughts on any of this? Do you see how every member of a local church can be part of this discussion? After I was converted, there was somebody that just wrote a card that had Ephesians 5:8 in it. For you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children as light. I still have that card. Anybody could do that. Anybody could send a text. Anybody could say, you want to come over for lunch, dinner, whatever. We want to get to know you because you're part of the body now, and you're a brother or sister now. So, anything else you guys want to say about any of this? The work of evangelism and the work of dealing with a skeptical world that we live in is not just a matter of knowing how to answer questions. It's a matter of loving people. And loving people that sometimes can't do anything back for you, but you still loving that person and sacrificing your time, talents, and energy. All of that shows that you've really been changed by the love of God. Any other thoughts or comments anybody wants to share about this? All right, yes.
I would just want to add that even today, after all the years that I've been a Christian, what helps me is knowing and seeing people come forward and admit they're not perfect. And you know that you're looking around at people just like you, and we're not trying to act like, we are imperfect people, and for the rest of your life, these people are going to encourage you by showing their imperfections as much as helping guide you to the same place.
Yeah, good. Anything else? All right, well, I think we'll stop there. And I have appreciated very much the time that we could all spend together. Because we have about a 2-hour drive tonight, we're going to leave pretty quickly when everything's wrapped up. And so we may not get around to saying bye to everybody, but thank you very much for the opportunity to be part of this with all of you. Really appreciate the work that is happening here and what the Lord is doing here. And so it's been a pleasure and a treasure to be with you guys these last few days. I think somebody's going to close us out tonight. Yeah. All right.